Good evening, Brian. It's Thursday. And you know what that means? It's time for a Thursday Top 5. What I'm going to talk about tonight is my top 5 favorite Stephen King books. Now, as you might know, Brian, I'm a huge fan of Stephen King. Just about anything he's done. I own, I think, all of his books. I've read probably 2/3 of them. I like the short stories he's written. I like the movies that are based on his books. I'm just a huge fan of basically everything Stephen King. So the first one I'm going to talk about is 11/22/63. This is one of his more recent ones coming out in the last few years. Without spoiling too much of it, basically the premise is that this gentleman finds a way to travel back in time and ends up actually trying to travel back in time to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy on September 22nd, 1963. But it's more than just that. It's a pretty big book, like most of his books are. So there's a lot more to it than just that. The way that he does the world building for the time back in the 50s and 60s is really, really neat, and it's just a really good story. That it's a thriller. There's sci-fi aspects to it. There's a romance aspect to it. It's just a really nice story, and it really shows the breadth and the range of Stephen King's writing talents. The next one I want to talk about is The Shining. This is one of his oldest ones and is definitely a classic. I like the movie with Jack Nicholson a lot. I also like the movie or mini-series that they made related to it as well. But the book is definitely the best way to go. It's a really cool book. It's scary and suspenseful. It really also is really interesting because not only does it have the elements of a typical like ghost story haunting with things happening, but it's also sort of more about somebody slowly losing their grip on reality and becoming more of a monster themselves. So it's just it's a classic book. It's a really good example of the genre of scary or horror, and it's definitely one of the ones that I like a lot. The next one I want to talk about is The Stand. The Stand is epic, without exaggeration. It's one of his longest books. In fact, the initial version was abridged a good bit by the editor, and then after Stephen King got even more famous and more popular and could sort of do whatever, he decided to release the original version, which is even longer than the one that first came out. But it's an epic, apocalyptic survival tale of the bands of survivors trying to make it through a desolate wasteland after a big catastrophic event. Think like Fallout, where everything is destroyed and there's only a few survivors. That kind of apocalyptic survival story, but it's just super far-ranging and super big and detailed, and definitely just a big, epic, great story. The next one I'm going to talk about is actually not fiction. It's called On Writing, and I like it a lot because it really has a lot of Stephen King's voice as a person in it. It sort of reflects on his process of writing as well as a little bit about his life, and it's just fascinating to learn about, especially if you're interested in Stephen King as a person as well as an author. And finally, the last one isn't quite one book, but is in fact a whole series, the Dark Tower series. This is widely regarded as Stephen King's magnum opus. It's his biggest series. It's a fantastic, wonderful sci-fi fantasy series by itself. I mean, it is really just one of my favorite series in general by itself. But what's even more cool about it is that it sort of is the linchpin in the center of a giant web of a lot of the other stories that Stephen King's written, all of which sort of have references and points of correlation and carryovers into the Dark Tower series. So it's really cool from that aspect too if you're a fan of his other books, because you see how a lot of his other worlds and universes and stories interconnect with this one giant meta story. So that's about it I have time for, Brian. I know that I don't think you've read too much of Stephen King, but if you decide to after this, I would definitely love to hear about it. I hope you consider checking these out because I think they're all great books, and I look forward to seeing your video tomorrow. Have a good night, Brian.